Hi and welcome. I'm Dr. Anna Smith, and I would like to welcome you to our first session of the 2025 Creatively Critical Tech Research Design Practice Speaker Series. So I have some introductory remarks, and while I make them, I'm going to ask those of you who are joining us today if you could use the chat to introduce yourself. You can find the chat button below, and then please make sure that the radial dials move to everyone. And then we're going to keep the chat open so we can have a dialogic experience on the side. So please respect that and keep your comments productive. All right, so what the Creatively Critical Tech series comes to us from the Education Now Lab at Illinois State University in the School of Teaching and Learning. And the Education Now Lab is a community-engaged research practice lab that uses immersive and emerging technologies to inquire and produce a range of critical, interdisciplinary, public, academic, and new media scholarship with and alongside community members as we labor towards more just education futures. And you can imagine why we're thrilled to have our speaker with us today to help us think deeper about research creation. And you can find more information and some video recordings from our past series at the Education Now Lab website, and I'll share some of those links in the chat. So the series is sponsored through the Advancing Research and Creative Scholarship Tier 2 grant from the ISU Office of Research and Office of Research, and we thank them for their support. And in that, we also recognize the continuous ways that our work at Illinois State University is supported by histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution over 160 years. And specifically the harm inflicted in our institution by being built on the land and waterways of multiple indigenous nations who were forcibly removed, including the Illini, Peoria, and the Miami. And for me, as we're currently seeing sustained struggles and happening with peoples and lands and horrific current events, I hope we can dedicate our insights and energies gained today toward action, however is best for communal well-being and flourishing. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Kristen Carlson, who will introduce our speaker today.
Hello, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kate Hennessy from Fraser University. She's an associate professor specializing in media at Simon Fraser's School of Interactive Arts and Technology in Canada. As an anthropologist of media and the director of the Making Culture Lab, an interdisciplinary research creation and production studio, her work uses collaborative, feminist, and decolonial methodologies to explore the impacts of new memory infrastructures and cultural practices of media, museums, and archives. She values working across disciplinary boundaries in her practice, including expression in video, photography, digital fabrication, and virtual exhibition. And you can visit the Making Cultures Lab website to learn more about her work. Thank you, Kate, and welcome.
I just realized I can't share. I don't have a cursor while I'm sharing, so now let's try that again. Here we go. Now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
okay,
can.
Great. Okay, let's try that again.
No problem.
Good?
Yes,
okay,
just
wonderful.
the continue to share is in the front.
Oh,
if you
let's
want
get that. Okay, now we're good. Okay, perfect. We have to get creative with our technology here. So thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you so much, Anna, for inviting me. I'm really honored to be asked to speak. As Kristen said, my name's Kate Hennessy. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a settler scholar of Irish and German descent, and I grew up on the west coast of Canada on the unceded territory of the Penelakut peoples. Here's a really kind of pretty photograph of the Simon Fraser University main Burnaby campus, surrounded by clouds. And I just want to also acknowledge that now I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, as an uninvited occupant of the ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And then the Surrey campus, where our lab is located and where I work most of the time, is on the territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Kikite, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and numerous Stolo nations. So as you mentioned, Anna, we are uninvited occupants of these territories and have a commitment to engaging with those histories and their legacies in the present and our roles in upholding, but also challenging those legacies. Here is an image of the Making Culture Lab. This is a kind of a typical meeting or gathering of people. And this will be familiar to Kristen, who I know hopefully fondly remembers these spaces and our campus. The Making Culture Lab is a group that I started back in 2010 when I was hired after just finishing my PhD in anthropology at University of British Columbia. And since then, with students and faculty members and artists and community collaborators, we've been exploring this interdisciplinary space between art and anthropology. If you go to our website, you'll see a lot of different projects that we've taken on over the years. But I would say this statement here kind of sums us up. We essentially are looking for different ways to explore the collaborative development and evaluation of culturally specific applications of new media in public space, in museums, in communities, and between physical and virtual spaces. And our work happens through media making, through curation, through artistic practice, and also ethnographies of media of all forms in social practice. And in particular, we're very interested in materiality, in ethics, and right now increasingly transmediation between the physical and the digital. When we do this work, we're committed to participatory and decolonial approaches to media production and curation that prioritize partnership and collaboration. And what I'll be talking about today and giving you a whole bunch of images and examples of different projects and orientations and ways of seeing this work. We'll be talking about research creation methodologies, which support for us the development of reciprocal research, curatorial and media production relationships with like museums and other kinds of heritage institutions, Indigenous communities, and artists. So I'm excited to tell you about this work. I'm gonna, in a moment, take you back kind of to my like grad student days. So I hope there's some, but you know, I think I just say like in giving talks about the kind of work that I do, sometimes it's fun to look back and think about where some of the ideas came from and how you got started on a particular path, because academics tend to have fairly niche spaces of work. And it's like, how did they get there? What does that look like? But overall, for our lab, I would say that our emphasis is in three kind of spaces. The first would be looking for like new forms, new ways of sharing scholarly work and academic work. So not just in a paper or a book, but maybe through exhibition, other ways of representing the results of our research. And again, collaborative production, really central. I think if you look at the work in our lab and our publications, we really prioritize co-authorship, co-creation, and making as a starting point. And the little image up in the corner there is a link, or is just reminding that this is an image that comes from a workshop, from an exhibition that is online produced by the Skowlitz First Nation with the Virtual Museum of Canada. And this is us choosing some images for a virtual exhibit together that you can find online in our website. And then the third kind of space I mentioned is this idea of research creation. So research creation, I don't know if that's a term that you're using a lot in your space, but in Canada for sure, research creation has become a more and more sort of common way to talk about this translation between art practice and scholarly work. So as a method increasingly visible in anthropological work, for example, research creation brings together artistic and scholarly methodologies. And as Natalie Lovelace has written, it legitimates hybrid outputs. It raises questions about the reshaping of artistic research into an academic discipline. Like, is that a good thing? But also asks what's at stake in pedagogy, practice, and experimentation. And there I'm referencing Erin Manning's work and also Hito Sterl's questioning. So this is a very rich space, but it gives us opportunities to think about alternative forms and alternative ways of mobilizing knowledge and working together in co-creative ways. So this is where I'm going back a little bit. So when I was a grad student and then into my early years as a professor at Simon Fraser University, I was part of a collective called the Ethnographic Terminalia Curatorial Collective. And this came out of a bunch of grad students at a big anthropology conference, all of us producing our own artwork and trying to think about ways that we could share this work that didn't fit into the conventions of a conference. If you've been to an academic conference, you get like 15 minutes and, you know, a certain number of slides pretty much. And that is the way that you share information, or maybe you publish a conference proceeding and that's the way. But I think across disciplines, increasingly, we're looking for new ways and creative ways of representing that work in different ways. So we decided that we would curate shows alongside the annual meetings of the American Anthropological Association and invite people to submit their artworks and then find spaces and produce these shows. And this became something really exciting for us. So I'll just quickly mention this was my good friends, Trudy Lynn Smith, Craig Campbell, Stephanie Takaragara, and Fiona McDonald. So these are all now academics all in places all over. But we, as grad students, started doing these shows together. So just as like an example of maybe where some of these ideas for our lab started to come from. In 2011, we created an exhibition in Montreal at the Eastern Bloc Center for New Media and Interdisciplinary Art. And the topic that we chose was Field Studio Lab. And so this idea was that people would explore the fluid boundaries between the field, which is like the site of exploration for anthropologists traditionally, which is changing, of course, what the field means, what the studio is in relation to anthropology, and how that has this very fluid boundary with the lab and where another kind of place where scientific knowledge is produced. So we put the show together and invited people to come and think about those boundaries through that lens. A couple years later, we were close to you in Chicago at the Arts Incubator in Washington Park, a contemporary art space. And we were exploring this idea of residency or exhibition as residency. We invited anthropologists from all over the world to come and spend a week realizing a project together in the same space. And then, you know, we took up other ideas, like ideas of the Bureau of Memories, archives and ephemera, where we're exploring the things that fall outside the margins of the archive, things that don't get preserved or don't count, and many anthropologists respond to this call with their own artworks, interpreting this call in different ways. So all of this is to say, this was very exciting for us. It was very generative, and we were increasingly convinced that this approach had something important to offer anthropology, and that this has increasingly been framed for us as a research creation approach. This is just a bunch of images from another subsequent workshop where we started playing with like rapid publishing and sort of like zine production as an alternative to academic proceedings. Here at a conference, we are doing a rapid publication about photo essays and sort of re-engaging the concept of the photo essay as a scholarly practice. And handed out a book at the end of the conference that we had managed to like publish and produce during the conference. So just kind of setting some challenges for ourselves that were really fun. So this kind of actually lends a little bit to a conversation Anne and I were just having before starting the talk today, which is, you know, our socio-technical environment that we live in and that we work in is changing really fast right now. And by using those tools and engaging with them, we tend sometimes unknowingly to reproduce relationships of power and exploitation that we maybe feel powerless to challenge because of the environment we live in. Together, after about a decade of working as a collective, we are noticing that the discipline of anthropology is sort of converging around this concept of something that we call the multimodal. And I don't know if that's something that translates into the work that you're doing in your space, but this is this idea that there are many different tools, many different technologies that allow us to do anthropology in different ways, new tools. In some ways, this can be presented as being kind of liberatory, maybe from some of the constraints of the discipline in the past that had their own power inheritances and kind of like disciplinary legacies that we are very rightly pushing against. however, with this group of authors, we have been doing some writing that pushes back against the multimodal as being seen as a kind of liberatory framework. And instead of asking people to practice multimodal anthropology, we are increasingly calling for an anthropology of the multimodal. So a kind of critical engagement with the tools of our world today that allows us, through the use of those tools, to understand them better through our practice and through our engagement with them. So we framed this as something we call bad habitus, which is a play on the feminist anthropologists Sarah Ahmed's critique of institutions, white supremacist and patriarchal academic institutions. She's called out the bad habits that people have within those institutions that tend to allow those habits and dynamics to continue and reproduce. And then Pierre Bourdieu's concept of habitus, and this idea that we reproduce relations of power through our everyday practices, whether we know it or not. And so this has kind of been a new project of encouraging scholars like yourselves to use tools in a critical way that allows us to kind of break through and increase our understanding of the implications of using those tools. So now with one of my ethnographic terminalia curator colleagues and friends, Stephanie Takaragawa, we're working on an edited volume that will be called Bad Habitus Toward an Anthropology of the Multimodal, which brings together scholars from all over working in this space of research creation in anthropology who are using the tools that they wish to critique as a way to better understand them and draw attention to the socio-technical environment that we exist in today. So I'm excited to be working on that right now. One of the chapters has a horse in it, so this is a playful take on that. So all of this is to say, research creation, according to Canadian scholar and artist Natalie Lovelace, rather than uncritically adding one disciplinary apparatus to another, it marshals new methods that allow us to tell new stories, stories that demand new research literacies and outputs. And this is really my entry now into a couple of project examples that I hope give you a sense of the way that we're thinking about research creation in our lab right now. So two projects, two examples of research creation like lenses or way of thinking about research creation that have come to guide our creative collaborations between art and anthropology towards this idea of the anthropology of the multimodal. So the first one that I'll talk about is a project called Fugitives in the Archive with an artist and anthropologist, Trudy Lynn Smith. And the lens is that I'll be talking about is this term anarchival materiality that I will explain. And then I'm going to talk about a project with an amazing artist, Haida Kwakwakiwak Weaver, an artist named Megan O'Brien. And I'll be talking about that through the lens of transmediation. Okay, so way back when actually we were in Chicago at the Field Museum in 2013, Trudy and I were looking through some of the collections at the Field Museum that had been collected for the World's Fair on the Northwest Coast. And we found this incredible folder that had a pastel Northwest Coast drawing in it that had like transferred to the inside of the folder and created this whole new image. And we had a really like flash moment where we thought, wow, within archives themselves and in museum collections, all of these lively material things are happening that archivists are always trying to like prevent, right? Like mold or paper burn or vinegar syndrome. There are all these things that happen in archives that actually end up destroying the contents of the archive. And we realized that this was really interesting space for us as artists and anthropologists. So in the years that followed, we've done a couple of projects in this space. The first was at the Provincial Archives in Victoria, British Columbia, where we worked with archivists to identify things that were behaving unusually or badly in the archive that they wished to tell us stories about. So in this exhibition, you see an image from part of that exhibition here, which was called Fugitives in the Archive. We were sharing photographs and some experimental video related to some of these objects that archivists shared with us. And they helped us understand that many of these objects are fugitive in the sense that they ultimately cannot be kept. As we wrote, fugitive objects are the things that cannot be preserved because of their inevitable material deterioration, their obsolescence as technological systems, or their precarity as orphaned or unclassified residents of the archive. And that as these materials change, they actually force the archivists to reclassify them or relabel them. And so there's a very interesting interaction that happens between the archive and the archivist, which ultimately changes what we can know about the past. So there's a lot going on here. We began to understand this as something that we call anarchival materiality. So when the materiality of an object changes, it goes from being archival, like part of the archive, to suddenly anarchival, which means it's no longer able to be in the archive and be preserved. And we see this as a disruptive force of entropy in the archives, which actually raises questions about the persistence and the reliability of all the products of multimodal anthropology, but also his historical anthropology, because of how this undermines some of the claims we made about anthropologists preserving culture. As we developed this work, we continued on our sort of quest to forward this idea of an anthropology of the multimodal. So critical engagement with the tools and the technologies that we use, and thinking broadly about those tools and technologies like the archive as a technology and so on. We came up with kind of 4 points or a little bit of a manifesto about how we think research creation plays a role in helping people develop an anthropology of the multimodal. So I'm just going to share some of those points, and then I'm going to give you an example of how we've been continuing to develop this. So for us, an anthropology of the multimodal engages with the materiality of ethnographic research, its tools, its preservation structures, and its media. It also acknowledges the fugitive nature of documentary tools and everything that anthropologists document and collect. It's concerned with power and its manifestations in the material, including political economies of technologies and the role of humans in the reproduction of power structures through the design and use of technologies. And then the fun part, it can include speculative art and research creation practices to generate and communicate anthropological knowledge and theory. So as just an example of Trudy and I working through these ideas and thinking about how to apply them within our scholarly and art practice, one of the projects we did was not long after we finished our work at the Royal BC Museum, we heard in the news that there was a paleontology research center in northeastern British Columbia that was being closed down because the town had defunded it. So we thought, wow, there's all these fugitive dinosaur bones and casts and all of this research material that is just sitting there with no plan for its legacy. So we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to go photograph it before something happens to it? So we went to the north and we basically walked through with the amazing curator and researcher who was still working there, who showed us the spaces and helped us document the place. So in an exhibition that we had last year, we showed photographs from this space. So you're seeing some of the abandoned paleontology workstations, some of the spaces where dinosaur footprint casts were being kept, casts of dinosaur footprints in the earth that probably are not there anymore because of industrialization and weather. So really like traces of the past. And as an emergent research creation process, based on the photographs that we took of these footprint casts and dinosaur pathways, we worked with different processes, for example, anthotype photographic processes, which is kind of like cyanotype photography, which you've probably heard of. Which in itself is a very fugitive photographic process. So making copies and contact prints of these dinosaur footprints that have a kind of uncertain future, and of course a very, very long past, as a way to play with this idea of fugitivity and anarchival materiality in relation to the fossil record. And then playfully experimenting with different ways of representing this work. For example, this piece is 2 different exposures of the same fossil cast using red and like pink hued plant emulsions that we then put together in a lenticular kind of like plastic form. So if you know what lenticular images are like, they have little ridges, and as you move, the image changes. You probably have like storybooks or whatever when you were a kid and see them sometimes as like novelty items, but we use this as a way to kind of capture or archive these fugitive objects. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of ideas and concepts, but I hope what comes across here is that this is like a playful act of co-creation and theorizing, documenting place and finding new ways to tell the stories that we're trying to share. And so for this project, anarchival materiality as a research creation lens helps guide our creative engagements with fugitive collections in museums and archives. And this has been one of our approaches to thinking about research creation in relation to anthropology and art. Okay, now I'm going to go to one more project, which is another longstanding project in our group, and represents another way of thinking through this co-creative collaborative practice. So we've been really fortunate and honored to work with Megan O'Brien, Jad Kujus, who's a Northwest Coast weaver and artist who works in the traditions of basketry, raven's tail, and chilkat textiles. And she is a Kwakwaka'wakw and Haida woman, also of Irish descent. Megan's an incredible weaver and artist. And we first got to know Megan back in about 2017, 2018, when this incredible robe called Sky Blanket that she wove and designed was traveling as a part of an exhibition called Border X, which was at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and it was showcasing artworks by Indigenous artists who also have some connection to skiing or snowboarding or skateboarding. And Megan used to be a pro snowboarder, so this is part of her connection, but her blanket called Sky Blanket was an important part of the exhibition. But this exhibition was touring probably for a number of years, and she realized she didn't want it to tour for all this time because she wanted to have access to it and bring it back for use in community. So she came to us with this idea, along with the curator, Jamie Isaac, of perhaps scanning it or finding a way to replicate it so that the surrogate could take its place in the exhibition and travel, and the blanket could come home with her. So we worked tried different possibilities in our lab, but ultimately used photogrammetry to create a high resolution digital model of the robe. And then through a lot of generative conversation and discussion and thinking, we decided, along with a amazing digital modeling artist who was supporting Megan named Conrad Sly, we decided that we would create not a 3D print or any kind of physical object, but that we would create an animation that took viewers through this process of digital modeling. So I won't show you the film right now, but it basically starts with like points of the Pleiades constellation and then slowly takes form through point clouds and matrices and polygons, and goes through different kind of moments in the digital modeling process up to a kind of high fidelity replica, and then it kind of dissolves back into the stars again. It's really beautiful. And then once that projection had taken the place of the robe, Megan was able to bring the robe back into community practice again. So this is something we've written about together in a kind of dialogic, conversational way. But after we had been through this first experience, Megan started to wonder if some way of rematerializing some of those moments in that digital modeling process as new regalia might further help create access to regalia in her community. So we began exploring possibilities of using digital jacquard weaving as a way to rematerialize, to further transmediate between forms, and find ways to create these new forms, new ways of sharing her work. So I think the thing that's been very important here is that rather than a kind of digital copy or replica, these are new forms that are very connected to her existing artwork and come through her own design process. We were very fortunate to be able to work with a design researcher named Donia Uges, who is now a professor at Technical University of Eindhoven. She helped Megan and our team experiment with different ways of transmediating and translating between Raven's tail and Chilkat weaving styles into a very different style, which is the binary logic of a digital jacquard loom. So essentially, weaving drafts were developed in Photoshop and exported as like bitmap TIFFs to the loom controller. And we just began experimenting with little studies, different tests, which helped us start to explore the complexities of translating between Northwest Coast weaving and the logic of the TC2. And so we moved on with the goal of weaving a fully realized prototype with a long fringe based on a moment in that video from the film, which replaced Sky Blanket, which is called Wrapped in the Cloud. And moments where these points of light in the Pleiades constellation are just starting to take the form of the blanket. Now, there are many challenges and contradictions in doing this kind of work, like the width of the loom forced the transmediation to be woven in a vertical direction. And it was also very important to find a way to accommodate the fringe that is usually, that's integral to a Chilkat blanket. So we had to sort of find hacks and workarounds to loop the dowel, to create like a rig and loop the threads around the dowel so that we could create this integral fringe. And there are other kinds of limitations like the black and white warp and weft that were integral to this loom, but it also began to be something that we could embrace as a technical challenge and a stylistic challenge that has been very interesting and productive for Megan. In April of 2024, we were really excited to be able to exhibit these three works together at the Bard Graduate Center in New York. So you see on the left, Megan's original robe, Sky Blanket, in the middle, the film Wrapped in the Cloud, which had allowed this sort of important cultural dynamic to take place. And then on the right, you see the first prototype of one of these digital jacquard woven robes, which includes a great deal of hand finishing and addition of mountain goat wool and other materials that are integral to the original robe. So there's a very strong connection between the three. And this has been a really important way to use research creation to theorize and learn something very important and powerful. So in this case, the robe that was woven through the film, we've come to refer to as a descendant work. So this idea that it's a transmediated iteration of the original robe that retains a kinship connection to the belonging that inspired it. And this is a dynamic that we're now exploring with new robes, and have, here in New York, we had a chance to talk about it and have conversations that we'll be publishing soon in a little book project. But we're working right now really hard on an exhibit that will open at the end of this year at the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, which will showcase some of these new descendant works and Megan's broader traditional weaving practice in relation to these new works. So in the case of this project, transmediation is a research creation lens that has supported material and digital explorations that we think of as generative entanglements in Jad Cajusa's art practice. And we've been able through this work to better understand moving beyond just thinking about the replica as something that's an outcome of digital documentation, but descendant works that have their own life and identities going forward. So I hope that all these examples have shown how practices using research creation between art and anthropology are helping us to understand and share knowledge about materiality, ethics, and transmediation between the physical and the digital, and also our commitment to participatory and decolonial approaches to media production and curation that prioritize partnership and collaboration. And I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you want to add a question in the chat, feel free to do that. And yes, let's thank Dr. Hennessy. Thank you very much. And then also we are a small group here today. If you want to ask the question, you could use that raise hand tool. It's somewhere down there at the bottom. Let's see. I think it's to react now. You could raise hand and then hopefully I can see you. And we can unmute your mic.
Shall I unshare my screen, Anna?
Oh, sure. That will, yeah, that will help see the
right.
group. Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah, questions that we have.
I've shared a lot of things with you, total rapid fire, but I'm happy if you have any questions at all, even like things that maybe weren't clear concepts from anthropology or anything like that.
I'll ask a question. We often say collaboration, and it sounds like, oh yeah, we just all get along. It all works out smoothly. I'm wondering about, you mentioned some tensions around the materiality of the creation, let's say of the blanket. I'm wondering what are some practices of the collaborative research creation process that your collaborators and you have worked out, I guess, over time to think about for people to consider?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think I have a perfect answer.
Sorry.
I don't have a perfect answer. I think if I go back to the beginning of the talk, I talked about the Ethnographic Terminalia Collective. Beginning that project, there were lots of unknowns and a lot of like deep creative energy and desire to do something exciting. And certainly along the way, we had to continually revisit our relationships and our roles and responsibilities. So I think being very open, being very clear, maybe trying to have like a living document, like some kind of like a team agreement. That's probably something I do with my students, working together on films in my film class and that kind of thing, but some kind of like really upfront agreement about how people are going to work together and how you're going to try to resolve conflicts when they come up, because they inevitably do, especially over long periods of time. People change, priorities change, interests change, and I think we have to be open and responsive and willing to have those conversations and work through the hard times that inevitably come up. And then also be ready to decide when that collaboration can end. So like the Ethnographic Terminalia Collective worked for 10 years together, which was quite a long time. But at some point we said, maybe this is done now. Like maybe we all need to go our different directions. I think the project that I shared with Trudy Smith. Trudy and I worked together in the Ethnographic Terminology Collective and just found a common interest. And I think we've had a desire to continue to work together in a creative partnership that's allowed us to do things that we couldn't do alone. So, one of the benefits of collaborating is that, and you often have an opportunity to work on a project that you would not have been able to realize by yourself. And that's the beauty of bringing different skills and interests and maybe theoretical orientations together. So there's that. And then if I think back to projects I've had the honor and opportunity to work on, especially in relation to larger projects in collaboration with Indigenous communities, like I'm thinking here, the Scowlitz Virtual Museum project that I shared. Though that project was ultimately mobilizing around the interests of community members and telling the story of their long-term development of collaborative community-based archaeology. So the work that we did was responding to a need in the community. And then, so I think those kinds of tensions always come up, but I think the challenge is to respond, generously and openly to resolve them. Yeah.
Really helpful. Thank you. We had a question come in from Franklin. Oh, did you want to say that one, Kristen? I get it.
Perfectly fine.
Okay.
You may continue.
All right. And they're saying that it's really great. Thank you. And what advice would you have for someone starting their first research creation project, especially those from a non-arts or design background?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things I really appreciate about where I teach, and I think I'm just gonna take a wild leap and say, Kristen, you're lucky to have this amazing professor who is who did a lot of her training where I teach. So I think she's gonna get what I'm trying to talk about, and maybe we'll have a little conversation about it. But one of the priorities at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, which is an interdisciplinary space, so from computer scientists and dancers to architects to artists, media art historians, designers, AI artists, and developers, we all work together. And the thing that unites us is that we all create things. We all make things as a starting point for our work. So, if you were a computer scientist and you wanted to use code to generate some kind of creative computational artifact, I would say that is an act of research creation. And then your job is to present it and to explain to me what it is and what it does. So I think there's a kind of a challenge. You're all sitting in a wood shop right now, and you could make a claim that the wood sculpture, object, or whatever it is that you're creating is an act of research creation because it helps you to ask a question, or it is a kind of boundary object or a touch point for having conversations about a particular topic. And so centering the artwork and the process of making it and contextualizing it perhaps with what you're trying to do with it, for me is a nice starting point. And I think as people go into writing about the work, or maybe doing a thesis or a dissertation about the work, it just further challenges you to forward the making process as a really important part of the research itself. It's not just the answer that the work allows you to encounter, and it might ask more questions than it answers, and that's okay within research creation. So I would say it should be a very open process, but deciding what it is that you want to make and maybe asking yourself why you want to make it and who's made that kind of thing before and who can you learn from and what does it allow you to say? How's that?
That's perfect. And can I just throw in too that I'm really I love what you were talking about early in your presentation, that the way you talk about it doesn't necessarily just need to be in an academic format as well. And seeing the like the video of the digital process behind Sky Blanket and looking at the processes involved on the digital side as well as maybe what's happening on the fabrication side is just really nice to really illustrate the making processes as well as the talking about them.
Yeah, I think this is, for me, this is like this emerging idea of the anthropology of the multimodal. So, you know, we've been very fortunate to like find ways to support Megan's interests as an artist. So she's a weaver, incredible weaver with like deep traditional training, but who has had these questions about how her work sits within the institution. So wanting to bring Sky Blanket off of exhibit, and then, you know, being able to work together to think through how that video called Wrapped in the Cloud allows people to ask different kinds of questions, like what would it even mean to digitize something? What is the process of digitizing it? How is it a collective effort because of the thousands of people who have contributed to even the software to create that work? Or what is the cloud where all of the data processing is happening? You know, what is it? What are its connections back to land and territory and water? And so it raises lots of questions, and there's something very exciting about that.
That makes me think about another comment that's in the chat here from Rachel. Thanks for your talk. Going beyond replicas, reformatting, or digital surrogates to the ideas of generative entanglement and the persistence life of a replica is fascinating, and it's given me much to consider as a librarian. No questions at the moment, just gratitude. Rachel is very similarly struck by that idea of descendant works, of making in order to preserve, quote unquote, right? This idea of replicas to preserve versus making to preserve is seems to be very generative.
Yeah, I think something that I'm thinking about and just grappling with is just how any of us can feel empowered to challenge the like what is the word, just like the unimaginable scale of the technologies that we are like in right now in this little box. You know, here we are talking to each other and recording to a cloud, and we're just like, we are so deeply enmeshed in these vast technological infrastructures, and I think it can feel a bit defeating sometimes. But I think you know, people doing their own creative projects that aim to dig a little deeper into these technologies, being creatively critical, right? These should be kind of empowering moments that gives us a chance to speak back to these infrastructures or make decisions about how we want to use them or not use them, and that we don't have to just accept them as inevitable. You know, I think yeah, so it's been very interesting to learn through this long collaboration with Megan as a weaver, to learn about a little bit about weaving. I would say I have even cracked that open because there's so much to know, but also to think about how the project has enabled us to maybe advocate that the history of computing owes something, as we know, to weaving and punch card looms and jacquard weaving. So like the origins of computing really go back to traditions in weaving. And this has changed our planet and changed our existence. So to have the opportunity to think about Megan's practice in weaving and where it goes back to, and how this is enabling us to think differently about the technologies that we are all, you know, deeply enmeshed in is quite inspiring. And I'm grateful to have that opportunity.
Thank you so much. That's a great note to leave on, and have us continue to think forward, not just the use of tools, right? But the critical engagement with the entire infrastructure and how that intersects with our histories and cultures. And and our choice, our agency in that of what we do moving forward is empowering. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for everyone on the call. And if you want to register for any other talks, you could do that in the link that will be provided.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.